welcome once more. It's a Friday, so it must be Emerald Heart Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Alan Cox, and welcome. We've had a bit of a strange week. We've actually had a little bit of sunshine, some really nice warm days, and today it's done what it best does over here. It rained, and it rained, and it rained. But on the other end of the line is the guy who always brings sunshine into my life, Mr. Dave Ashworth. Hi, Dave.
Evening, Alan. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
You're filling up with sunshine right now.
That's right, you got it. Oh, dear. So,
yeah, well, it has been a miserable couple of days, hasn't it? Really cold and wet. In fact, I'm sitting here in a fleece. And I've just put the central heating on as well.
Yeah, we've had ours on this evening, to be honest.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. Last Sunday I got sunburned, so you don't know what to do you, for the best?
Well, crazy enough, Anne and I, we've been up to the northeast of England, and I forecast Tuesday and Wednesday and yesterday to be horrendous. And Tuesday and Wednesday, it was absolutely gorgeous. It was up into the mid-70s. Well, that's in old money, 20, 21, 22 degrees centigrade. And it was absolutely lovely. But yesterday turned back to type,
Yeah.
So, anyway, the guides came to me, as they do, in the week. And I think it was yesterday I sent over what they wanted us to talk about. And I suppose it's a bit controversial, really, because it's lest we forget. Yeah. And it's 90 years this year since the beginning of... it's 100 years. My apologies. Is it? 100 years.
It's 100.
100 years, since the beginning of World War One.
That's why we're having a centenary.
That's right, yes. Look, I live in the past. I stay younger by doing that, Dave.
Yeah, I know.
I take 10 years off my life.
You can fool some of the people some of the time, Alan.
Yeah, but not all the time.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I'll come back into the real world. Yes, a centenary. And obviously, the people, the soldiers who died then, have been remembered. And the topic, lest we forget, is, I suppose, a case of, well, why do we remember? Because that war was supposed to be the Great War, the war to end all wars. And here we are 100 years on, and you look at the world, and lots of parts of the world are still at war.
Yeah.
So, what was the point of all those thousands, if not millions, of soldiers over the years losing their lives?
Yeah.
How do you look at that one, Dave?
Well, another way of looking at it is, what tends to happen these days is it's the civilians that lose their lives. Hundreds and thousands of civilians.
Yeah.
Because the nature of war has changed so much. If you think about the First World War, they were only just getting aeroplanes off the ground. They were still going into battle with horses and carriages. So, in 100 years, humanity's come a long way in terms of technology, but we haven't come very far in terms of evolution of consciousness, because we're still fighting wars. Sorry, go ahead.
No, what I was going to say, Dave, it's this weekend, I understand, in America, it's Memorial weekend, and they have a public holiday on Monday. And we have a public holiday, what we call a bank holiday on Monday. And we don't use it as a memorial.
No.
It used to be called Whitsuntide and holiday. Now they just call it Spring Bank Holiday.
Yeah.
And yet, if you're going back for the war 100 years ago, it was more to do with us and Europe. And really, this is really the first time that our country has really acknowledged properly the First World War. We talk a lot about the Second World War, but it's kind of lost its importance. Yeah, it's almost like somebody's just remembered this year. Well, it's been 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, it's quite interesting because there's a lot of celebrations going on, people gathering, one or two old soldiers left who are turning up down on northern France. And I was over in northern France a couple of years ago with a group of chaps with the Classic Car Club. We were having a drive round down there, and one of the lads wanted to go and see could he find the record of his grandfather who was killed in northern France. And that was a very interesting experience. It's not somewhere I'd have kind of chosen to go on my own, but as I was with a group, we went to some of the battlefield sites and the memorials. And the energy of emotion in these places is absolutely overwhelming. So, you know, what you're picking up there really is not only in the battlefield areas, the energy of emotion that's still embedded in the landscape, but also the energy of emotion of the people that visit there. So this place is a kind of large sinkhole for emotions. And for people who do cleansing work, many people do visit these sites and clear spirits on and cleanse the earth. But it's like a process that just goes on and on and on, because the people that visit there pour their emotions into the earth again. So certain parts of the battlefields of northern France are absolutely saturated with this emotional energy, and anybody who's sensitive that walks into this space can't help but be overwhelmed by those emotions. It's a very interesting experience.
Actually, although I haven't experienced what you've experienced, I have up in Scotland at Culloden, just a few miles from Inverness, and even though that battle took place in 1746, you can still feel those energies on that moor after all those, hundreds of years.
That's right. Yeah, you can. Yeah. Well, a lot of these celebrations this year are also the 70th anniversary of D-Day, which is the Normandy landings. So we've got the centenary of the First World War, and also the 70th anniversary of the D-Day, which was the landing on the Normandy beaches by all the Allies, and that's going to be a massive event, so I believe. I know many people that are going down there, with old vehicles, for example, taking part in these celebrations. But what causes war? There's the question. The answer is people.
Yeah.
So, why do people cause war? Well, it's very simple. When you look into the consciousness of humanity at a very deep level, what you actually experience is an inward battle for survival. So just take a moment to think about that. The inward battle for survival. At a kind of, it goes even beyond a genetic level. It goes into a kind of an atomic level at the fundamental existence of, not only humanity, but anything that lives, has this built-in kind of process where it's always trying to survive. Whether it's a flower being hammered by the weather and the wind, when difficult situations come to the flower, it actually thinks about survival. And what we have in human consciousness is that we're all living in quite a fragile system. There's a lot of people on this planet, And there are those that have more than others, and there are those that have absolutely nothing. But what is common to all of those people is a sense that they need to become secure, and there's this inner fight for survival. So this inner fight for survival, although it's going on at a very fundamental level of humanity, it's also kind of amplifying itself up into the ego of people, and it's actually the ego that causes the wars. So if you think about the need for survival, what you often find is people that rise to the top of the tree quite often do this through the subjugation of others. And in order to do it on a grand scale, you have to pull other people into your thinking. So it's almost like a brainwashing process. So if you think of any world leaders that have started major wars, they've got to have people on their side to go with the same thinking. And what you quite often find is nobody has the courage to say no or to walk away. And if they do say no and walk away, they're quite often shot as traitors. So what you get is this massive egocentric energy that tries to take from other humans, and that is the cause of wars. So there's usually an aggressor and there's usually a defender, although sometimes there can be joint aggressors. But certainly one of the aspects of consciousness that's very profound within humans is the need to subjugate others. And what happens with the ego, it gains security by knowing it's in charge of everything else. So when we start to walk a spiritual path and our consciousness begins to develop, and the ego begins to dissolve in that process, then we become free of that need to dominate. And we actually see how the game works very, very clearly from that kind of position.
The when you actually look back at the history of the world, going back, the last century, but then go back further, it's a case of that a lot of people, they need somebody to follow.
Yeah.
And then if you've got lots of people who are very strong, and you get one band of people following one and one the other, and their ideas don't mix, then you get a struggle for dominance, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and what it comes down to really is a lack of tolerance for others. So if you can live comfortably within your own skin, so to speak, and you're tolerant of all other people. So, for example, being at the head of an organization like the Emerald Heart, I don't pretend I've got all the answers. I put things out to the other people sometimes, and I say, what do you think of this? How are we going to deal with this? So that's a kind of tolerance. It's being open to allow the consciousness of other people to come in to perfect an idea. And it's like, I can't remember who said it, but it's like the saying about the parachute. The only time a parachute is like your mind, it's only ever useful if it's open.
Yes, that's right.
I think it might have been Frank Zappa, actually, but I'm not sure.
It wasn't that guy who was falling out of the aeroplane, was it, and shouted it?
Well, same thing.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, the only time it's useful, though, is when it's open, isn't it?
That's right.
Then it's a lifesaver. Yeah.
How do you see the guides, the spiritual guides, look at us human beings when we are, shall we say, fighting? And by that, I mean, let's go to the Second World War, and you've got Adolf Hitler, and it became obvious that it had to be stopped. Now, do you see that God Spirit sees the justification of standing up for yourself and resisting and fighting something that is obviously bad and evil? Is that something that because there's a song, isn't there, which obviously is a religious song, "Onward Christian Soldiers, Marching Us to War." Now, that song is sung in the sense of standing up for what you believe and having the wherewithal to actually do something about it. So, do you see that Spirit condones that sometimes we have to take arms?
Well, you can parallel this by looking at it a different way. So, as you become more spiritually awakened, you connect more into the life force of everything. And I remember reading something about a spiritual teacher once. I can't remember who it was, and somebody was asking the spiritual teacher what was the biggest regret that he ever had in his life. And he said, "It was the fly I accidentally killed when I brushed it off my leg." And I can identify with where he's coming from with that, because to accidentally kill any life force when your consciousness is more fully awakened is a horrendous process. The guilt and the grief you feel inside just for the loss of the life of that small flea or a fly can be devastating to the person who's spiritually awake. So we're given choices in this life. This is the planet of choice. So you have the choice to step up, or you have the choice to walk away. In the Old Testament, when we were in a different energetic time, it was very much an eye for an eye. So the thinking of the time was about revenge, an eye for an eye. When we entered a new era, and Jesus brought the next teachings through 2,000 years ago, he taught to turn the other cheek. We've had this come up before, actually, in one of our talks, and so it's a very difficult one to work out from the point of view that there is an aggressor. Okay, so it always starts with an aggressor, whether it's one person attacking one person in a street or a country, an army of a country attacking another country. There's always an aggressor in the beginning. And we do have the right to defend ourselves. And to defend ourselves, we may have to use force and even kill. Now, the death of another being, in terms of universal consciousness, on one level almost means nothing, because the consciousness and the energy of that person just goes right back into the melting pot of the universe. And these lives we have in this reality on Earth are merely a drop in time. It's almost like it's not on the scale of anything at all. It's almost like we've taken this little journey into Earth that may be a fraction of a second of time. We've had all these experiences from which our soul feeds and grows, and then we're moving on. So if you look at it from that perspective, it almost doesn't matter. It's totally insignificant. But when you look at it from the perspective of a human being, we go through this whole process of emotions, grief in particular, guilt. Guilt is a massive thing. And when you begin to awaken, and as the heart begins to illuminate, the guilt of everything you ever did, which was against universal law, will come back to you in a most dramatic way, absolutely overwhelming you. And so, if we look at that question with a kind of clarity, and the question really is it okay to kill people? Is it okay to defend yourself? Jesus does have a little teaching on this somewhere, but I can't quite remember what it is now. But if you parallel it by looking at it like this, if you find yourself in a jungle and all of a sudden you were faced by a handful of absolutely deadly snakes, and you had the choice to shoot them or to be bitten and die, what would we actually do? Well, there are certain situations where we have to try and preserve ourselves, and the snake will be trying to preserve itself, and we'll be trying to preserve ourselves, and one or the other will be the winner in that situation. And on one level it doesn't really matter, because life is always struggling to survive, and by the time it all comes out the other end of the game, once everybody has gained enlightenment, you'll have dealt with all the karma along the way for everything you did wrong. So if for some reason you shot all the snakes, the question is, would you attract any negative karma? Well, you can go so deep into this that we might be here for the next 20 years. But I'll give you an example. A friend of mine decided he was going to work in the Middle East many, many years ago. And on his, he set off and we all wished him well. We all had a drink the night before and wished him well, and off he went. And 2 days later he was back again. Right. I said, what are you doing here, Phil? He said, oh, well, I had a motor accident on the first day and I was arrested, and then they let me out and I had to appear again. And apparently in that particular country at that particular time, it wasn't his fault he'd had the accident. Somebody drove into him. But it was automatically deemed to be his fault, because if he wasn't in their country, it wouldn't have happened. So it's like, well, if you weren't in the jungle with the snakes, you wouldn't have created that situation where you had to shoot them. So you see, can you see how deep these things go?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many, many levels at which you can look at it. So it's very difficult to say, to answer the question, is there a right and is there a wrong? Because without the ability to see at the level of the God consciousness, it's not easy to answer that point.
So, now, what do we learn from war? Do we learn anything? The title of the show, Lest We Forget. It's okay remembering, and of course it's right to remember, but surely by remembering we should learn something from that memory of people losing their lives.
Yeah. But people very soon forget, and history shows this. If any of our people today, were on those battlefields in the First World War and saw the absolute mayhem and the slaughter, thousands and thousands of people dead in a field in one day, in a hail of bullets, you would walk away from that and say never again. But of course, the memory of humans, as we know, is very, very short. And, it's not 5 minutes later, well, it was a few years later, 30 years or thereabouts, that we had another great war, the Second World War. So what goes wrong with people's memories? They say, well, this should never happen again, but it does, and it happens over and over again. So if you think about the two recent Gulf Wars, and now there's soldiers here, there, and everywhere.
Yes.
It's just madness, is what it is.
And you look at Afghanistan. A lot of people perhaps don't realise that the fighting and the troubles that have gone in Afghanistan aren't just over the last 10, 20 or 30 years, they actually go back to the 18th and 19th centuries.
Yeah.
It's been a troubled land for a long, long time.
Yeah, yeah.
Believe it or not, we've got to take a break. We're almost there. Do you want to tell everybody how they can find the Emerald Heart, Dave?
Yes, indeed. It's emeraldheartlight.com. That takes you to our blog where you can find out all the up-to-date information, who's doing what, and where it's all happening. Thanks, Alan.
And if you want to know more about me, then look at my website, calmingthoughts.com. So we'll have a break and we'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to the Emerald Heart Radio here on Paramania Radio Network. I'm Alan Cox, one of your hosts, and my good friend and the other host is Dave Ashworth, and he should be there now. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Alan. Hello, everybody.
Right. So anybody who missed the first half, we've been discussing why do we remember people from the past, especially soldiers, people have lost their lives in wars, in battles. That isn't not meant to sound as if not caring, but surely the idea of remembering is that you don't allow something like that to happen again. But that doesn't seem to be the case, does it, Dave?
No, doesn't. Not the case at all. We were just saying before the break, even though war is an absolutely terrible, terrible thing, particularly the two world wars, the First World War and the Second World War, the mayhem and the absolute carnage, and people say, well, we mustn't forget this and it should never happen again. But it doesn't. We don't seem to go very far down the road before somebody is sending soldiers out again to some other situation.
But you see, you get situations where a group of people become fanatics, and it seems to be happening a lot, perhaps over this last 10 years, I suppose, 15 years, where a certain minority group of people decide that everybody in the world should do what they want.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't have any say in it,
That's right, yeah.
So I think there are times when, yes, you do have to stand up and be counted. But and it is a strange thing, the way that the world is going at the moment, because in some ways there's okay. Now I'm going to contradict myself here. In some ways, when you watch the TV, read the papers, listen to the news on the radio, the leaders of the main countries, i.e. UK, America, the main European countries and that, are in one sense being more critical and harder on the perpetrators, but then back off because there's a fear that if they stand up too much, then we could end up having a catastrophic war that perhaps none of us will survive, especially with the fact that you've got nuclear weapons and everything possible. It's a very strange situation at the moment.
Yeah,
I say you take Russia. No, say you take Russia. What's going on with Putin at the moment? This thing about we're going to put sanctions in, and we'll stop a few people accessing their money abroad and traveling to certain countries. I mean, it's like getting a child 50 years ago when it was legal to cane, and taking them into the headmaster's office and he gets a feather and just rubs it onto their hand, because that's about as much effect as those policies have. But there again, what's the answer?
Well, from my perspective, I tend not to see too much of what goes on in kind of world affairs, because it's just a distraction from, and people get caught up in the distraction. Yeah, for sure, it's bad stuff that's going on, but you know what? There's bad people all over the world. What you have to do is try and bring some love and some light into the world, and do some good things. And the more you can train your consciousness into that path of light, the less you actually see or perceive of the darkness that's going on around you. So, Jesus' teachings are quite clear on this, with this turn the other cheek thing. It works in so many different ways. And we did discuss this on one show once before, where, let's take a Second World War situation where Germany was pretty intent on dominating the world. Yeah. And they've managed it now through going through the back door with the economic process. But yes. what's going on in the collective consciousness, that they feel they have to dominate everything. It's just a sickness. That's all it is. It's a consciousness that is undeveloped. So what Jesus says with the turn the other cheek thing, if nobody fights back, then the perpetrator eventually wins everything. And of course, millions and millions of people die in the process. Yeah. So we've already spoken about the emotional carnage that's left. If one person dies in a family, many people feel the emotional struggle of that process of somebody passing. When hundreds or thousands or even millions of people die, the emotional fallout is absolutely dramatic. And what happens with that emotional energy is it's absorbed into the earth. And what that does over a period of time is crush or even kill the earth. But that's another story for another time. So let's assume that everybody turns the other cheek, and then the dominator who's dominated the world and won everything, what happens at that point? Once they've got everything, well, let's find out what they're actually trying to attain. They're trying to attain security for themselves. So this is usually based on a massive insecurity within themselves. And in order to feel secure, they have to dominate and control absolutely everything. So you see this working through governments. This whole thing, if you take the UK, perhaps the UK more than France and Germany, the USA, Russia, these are major players on the world stage, and they're all kind of fighting each other off in a certain way, but also at the same time trying to hold the high ground. So the USA, for example, is usually the first one to go blasting in somewhere, all guns blazing. Yeah, it's not quite the same this time, but when the Putin thing started off, they just sent jets in straight away. It's like this. It's like facing up to somebody in a boxing match, isn't it? It's the sparring. It's the face-off, so to speak. So who do you think you are? We're sending our jets in. We've got power too. They could have turned the other cheek and just laughed at what was happening. Of course, on a humanitarian level or a human level, if you did that, if you kind of, let's just let the Russians get on with it, half the world would be up in arms saying, well, why don't you do something? You're the guys with the guns, so to speak. But at a higher conscious level, when you see that, it's a game that's going to play itself out. And the game is all about the ego and the consciousness of one person who is just trying to protect his position because of insecurity.
So how do the guides see our world at the moment? Do they see that there are more and more people looking for the true answer to life, if you want to call it the spiritual path, and what's going on in the world it's happened before and before, and in some ways, people are getting tired of it.
Yeah. Well, most definitely, the universe is looking down at the Earth, and it's bathing the Earth in the most amazing light this last few years, and this has picked up an awful lot since 2012. So the speed of universal change is dramatic, and it's like the Earth is being bathed in this kind of solar wind of new energy, and the new energy is waking up people's consciousness. So, for example, we just had the polling today for the European elections and local elections, and this new party that's popped up from kind of seemingly nowhere has taken a massive amount of the seats. And, the old school is saying to the public, well, you don't know what you're voting for. These people are all lunatics. But what the public is really saying is, we're sick of the old ways. Yeah.
Give us something so we can believe in you again.
Yeah. It's saying, you're not changing. It's the same story each election. Same old story trotted out time and time and time again. And these new kids on the block, if they actually got into government, it might be chaos.
Yes.
But you know what? That's often how things change for the better, through the chaos. Because it's like the guy is showing me this picture of some people in a small plane, and the pilot suddenly passes out, and somebody else has got to fly the plane. When needs must, you learn to fly the plane, don't you?
That's very true.
That actually happened to a friend of mine once.
Really, did it?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, he was in a company plane, just him and the managing director, and they were flying back from London to Manchester after being on some event. And the managing director was flying the plane, and he was suddenly taken quite ill. And he said to Mike, you're going to have to fly the plane. And Mike says, well, I don't know how to fly the plane. He says, well, it's easy. He says, just hold the stick and follow the M6. And he did. He flew it all the way to Manchester, and then the guy landed it.
Wow.
So, I mean, that was a long time ago now, but needs must, isn't it? When people actually get into this situation, new people coming into a government, well, let's face it, we vote these people in as the government. What's the government supposed to be doing? It's not supposed to govern the people. It's supposed to govern the country. But they seem to have even lost that basic idea of what they're supposed to be doing. Anyway, we're kind of getting off the track with that one.
Yeah. Well,
but to answer, sorry, go on, Alan. Yeah.
No, I'm going to say, slightly off the track, but it is relevant to it, because this, lest we forget, that was what a lot of people have died for, is to have the freedom to criticise the
government.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah. Freedom of speech to say what we think. Yeah.
And some of these people who become so entwined in what they believe, they think that nobody should question what they do, and they want people just to be under their regime.
Yeah, that's right. So
I see that we're at a very critical point in some ways in the human evolution at the moment.
Absolutely,
And there's quite a big split in the world between people still trying to do the old thing of fighting, and if you want to call it the new generation of people coming to actually find out what our lives are really about.
Yeah, it's interesting. While you were talking just then, I don't know what happened, but this little crystal that was on the desk was calling to me, and I just picked it up. And as you were speaking, I was just gazing into it and, turning it round and having a look at it. And all of a sudden, I just felt it open the heart at a certain level. And then I realised this crystal has actually been calling to me for days as I've been walking past the desk, and I'd never picked it up. And it just flashed this little message into the heart to say, I've been calling to you for days. And now you pick me up in that moment when you're not really thinking. So what that is a sign of, this is a sign of the new consciousness. You pick it up and then you actually hear it speak. But people have been so disconnected for so long that they don't have the sensitivities to connect in to those things. So as you're saying, at this moment in time, we're in this critical period. We've seen lots of regimes of dictators falling in the last few years. And when you get, there has to be upheaval. The old ways have to die, but everybody will fight tooth and nail to maintain them. But there's no way they can maintain them ultimately, because the new energies coming in from the universe are smashing the old ways, just like they smashed the old ways from the Old Testament, where the kind of rule of the day was revenge, and you bring in the new teachings of Jesus, which is turn the other cheek. We're now heading into an era of new teachings again. And if you think about what's happening in the world, we've got countries that are still very much running with a kind of Middle Ages consciousness. We've got highly technological countries that are pushing the boundaries in lots of different ways. With, again, the new consciousness is fantastic for developing technology. And we're in this period where the modern Western world, if you like, is being threatened by the new consciousness, and the new consciousness is going to wipe out that old model, because it can't fail to do that. That is what evolution is all about. And the path of evolution is an absolute given. There's no way you cannot evolve. You have to evolve at some point. And what causes the evolution more than anything is the collective consciousness. So when you get enough people who are picking up the crystal on the desk and awakening, for example, you reach a tipping point where all of a sudden you get an acceleration, where there's so much of the new consciousness that the old consciousness can't survive in the face of it. And when that actually happens, we might then reach a place where we go beyond these war situations that we have, particularly driven by Western governments in this time.
It's really strange, because you were talking about your crystal, and this is quite true. That you said you're holding the crystal and that, and you probably can't even remember this, but as you were saying that, I was holding a crystal, and I still am, in my left hand.
Yeah.
And it's a clear quartz crystal, and you gave me this crystal about 16 years ago.
Really?
Seriously, yeah.
Can I have it back?
You sound like Aaron's dad. He just he gives presents and takes them back.
Yeah.
or you give him a present, he'll give it you back. It's kind of chamfered off at the top, and it's got a very powerful energy. And I've had this crystal with me all the time, all over the years, and it does actually sit on my desktop computer. So that is really, really strange.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting that you've had it that long, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Well, I suppose perhaps sometimes, it gives a lot of energy out. But in all the years that we went our separate ways until we come back together again, could you class it as some kind of symbolization that Spirit was saying, well, that connection is still there. It perhaps at the moment it isn't, in operation, but it's just it's just waiting. It's just waiting.
Yeah,
You know,
that's right.
so.
Yeah, the crystals are very interesting. They never stop talking to me. It's fascinating. And if I spend any time... Sorry, Alan?
No, I'm sorry. No, there's a question from... We've got 4 minutes left, and there's a question from Dave. And it says, at what point do you need to learn to let go of the past? That remembering the past and holding on to it is a bad thing. Now, that's a very good question, actually, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the answer is right now.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, the sooner you can do it, the better. Yeah.
And what you have to...
you become free of it. You become free of that energy.
What you have
the whole energy of the memory is an anchor. It holds you in space, in time and space.
And what you have to realise is what memories are holding you back. You can have memories from the past that are just that. They're just a memory, and you just think about it, and it's not holding you back. But there are some that which are actually keeping you where you shouldn't be.
That's right, yeah. And, collective consciousness, you should never underestimate the power of collective consciousness. Anybody who's walking the spiritual path in a serious way will have to pull themselves out of collective consciousness at some point in order for their own unique consciousness to develop, because the collective consciousness acts like a kind of wet blanket that holds everything down. It's this damp, heavy weight that's all around you. And what you have to do is separate yourself from that so you can emerge like a flower in a new day.
But that can be very painful, emotionally painful to do, can't it?
It is. It's a serious process. This is, speaking of warriors, this is why it's called the path of the spiritual warrior, because the inner transformations that you have to go through are indescribable. People look at you and there's no way they can ever know what you've gone through to attain that level of consciousness until they've gone through it themselves.
We're rapidly coming to the point at the end of the show again.
Yeah.
It goes so quickly this hour, doesn't it, Dave?
It does, Alan, yeah.
If you'd like to tell everybody how they can get hold of you and know more about the Emerald Art.
Yeah. Just before that, I'm going to leave everybody with a little saying from Jimi Hendrix when he appeared on one of the American chat shows early in his career. And he said, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, then there will be peace.
And that is so true, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely true. And now there was a guy who was ahead of his time. Yeah. So you can find out all about the Emerald Heart Light at emeraldheartlight.com, which is our blog. That tells you everything that's happening, where it's happening, who you can get in touch with, who you can work with. If you want to, free light transmissions occasionally on the equinox and the solstices, and lots of other fine biscuits of juicy tasting, sweet things for you to enjoy.
That sounds good. And if you want to know about me, you can look me up at calmingthoughts.com. So I think it's time for us to say goodbye again. I hope everybody has a really good holiday. And it's over to you, Dave.
Well, it's good night from me.
And it's good night